In this episode, we talk to Aditya Kulkarni. Aditya is the founder of Stoa School, an alternative to MBA. Stoa has taken an interesting approach to business education in India. So we decided to pick Aditya's brains for lessons in future relevance from his own journey, experience in building Stoa, and insights into community building. Aditya shared many valuable lessons that will be useful for many people in our audience. For a founder who's trying to build a team that has a sense of belonging, an educator trying to develop an online learning community, or someone interested in the future of education and learning. We also spoke regarding the slightly senior folks or middle managers, as they say. How should they think about leveraging communities like this, as well as how startups can leverage their expertise? This chat is packed with a lot of insights. I hope you find it as useful as I did. Welcome, Aditya. Welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Thank you, Harish. Pleasure to be here, and look forward to an interesting conversation over next or whatever time we spend together. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, good that you left it open-ended because there are a lot of interesting things that I want to pick your brains on. So when I, read about Stoa School and what you've been doing, there were a lot of questions, that came to mind. But let me just start with something which sort of gives a preface to what is going to follow. So, what is the whole philosophy and the meta thinking around, you setting up Stoa School?
Sure. So largely, we feel that as the internet penetration goes up, and what we have seen play out on the consumer social side will also play out on the education side, which means you can actually create institutions in the cloud, and these are like asset-light institutions, no physical campus, no permanent faculty, because they sort of operate from a low-cost base. They will be able to do a much better job of education at a fraction of a cost that typical traditional institutions do, while ensuring better learning outcomes, ensuring better career opportunities, and so on and so forth, right? So, I mean, we don't look at this space as like building another edtech company. We genuinely feel that like these internet native education brands will become the institutions in themselves, right? So that is our take. That is sort of like the overall picture, like internet native education institutions. The good thing about these institutions are they'll be much more nimble, much more responsive to what is happening in market, right? And they'll probably iterate on their curriculum, their mode of delivery, the way they approach education every 6 months compared to, let's say, every 5 years or every 10 years
Right.
that a typical traditional institution does.
Hmm.
What it will also allow is to create a sort of open door policy for industry professionals to come and teach and then go away and maybe come back and teach and go away, right? And in that sense, industry academia won't be siloed, right? It won't, like, it will essentially merge the academia and the industry, the work and learning. These things are sort of will merge, and I think COVID only accelerated that in that sense. But we'll discuss about how we got started maybe once we dive in.
Right. So, is there a specific niche audience that you're looking at as people who will get the maximum value out of Stoa School? Is it for the tech entrepreneurs, founders, co-founders kind of market only, or is there a larger base? Because I read that this you're primarily aiming at people becoming better at decision making in business. So that would involve everyone from people working in established roles, even people who have done their MBAs. Can you talk a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a design choice, right? Where we have started, and we primarily right now serve people who have already started their professional journey and don't see a traditional MBA as an option for whatever reasons, right? Like maybe they already have enough number of years of experience behind them, so MBA doesn't make sense. Maybe there are certain family constraints or economic constraints where they can't take 2 years off. And then there is the whole question on ROI and like, so if I join an early stage startup and grow with the company, I'm anyway going to grow much faster than, let's say, going to an MBA. Very interesting story. So Manoj, who is one of my co-founders at Stoa, he took a break from work, he got MBA admit, and then he went to work for Swiggy, set up, I think he was one of the earliest members at Swiggy. Right? And till date, he regrets that decision to go for an MBA. So imagine 2015, he was at Swiggy. Nandi is our batchmate from BIT. Harsha is a senior. Manoj was working at Tree, and then he decided to go do an MBA from UT Austin. And I think he regrets that to the and one of the reasons why he even joined Stoa is like, I don't want what happened to me or
Right.
the decision that I made happen to anyone else. But you are right. In general, if we have to sort of build this economy and sort of, let's say, create an Indian dream in that sense, we need much better talent. We need a lot more people entering the tech ecosystem, which continues to be our focus. And when they enter, they don't. I mean, if they have to grow with the industry and they have to sort of build this together, they need to be better decision makers, not just in their professional life, but also in their personal lives, right? Like, so if you see all the jumping around that is going on, let's say, when it comes to developers right now,
Right.
I mean, it may be good for them in the short term because, of
Correct.
course, if salaries are going up and up and up. But at some point of time, this musical chair need will stop, right? And I'm guessing it will stop. So when we say better decision making, we just don't mean in the business sense. We also mean it in general, like, when it comes to your personal lives. And I think that is why Stoa is not just a business institution. A lot of conversations we have or what our community has between them beyond just like immediate business and some personal clarity, career paths. Do I really want to be an entrepreneur? Do I like, do I even want to work at a startup, right? And when we measure the success of what we do, it is as much about whether some person was able to make, let's say, a transition into tech ecosystem versus somebody deciding not to pursue entrepreneurship. And I think that's a great success too, right? Like if somebody goes through our 6-month program and realizes they're not ready, that's a good outcome in my opinion, because then they would have saved few months, few lakhs. But yeah, in general, we have started with this niche set, alternate MBA, people who don't want to go for traditional MBA. But in general, the way this industry I see evolving is it will encompass all the professional courses that actually sort of are pathway to great careers.
Right.
And like, if you just look outside of there is 10K designers who is doing like the design education, Newton School, Masai School, who are doing like, tech education for people who are coming out of colleges. And they will become, I'm pretty sure Newton and Masai will become like a university or college in themselves at some point of time. Then you have Scalar, which is slightly pivoted away from the undergraduates to people who are already in tech roles and so on and so forth. So this whole ecosystem is getting built right now, right? And we are still in maybe year 1 or year 2 of this ecosystem. And my sense is this will play out over next a decade or two, where all these names will essentially become institutions.
Right, right. Yeah. So when you talked about these other alternatives as well, what do you think is going on in the minds of people who are taking up these courses or programs, whatever you want to call it today, right? Because these people are definitely thinking about their future relevance. They're exploring different options. There is clearly a sense of dissatisfaction with what is the incumbent alternative, which is why they are exploring these options. But I'm sure there will be some apprehension. So if there is something that you can talk about how you have allayed these apprehensions for people, or what have people come to you saying, this is what I'm looking for as a way to address this apprehension. What could that be, if you can talk about that?
Yeah, so when it comes from, let's say, career perspective, right, like people are clear that these options are clearly better. Where things sort of got pulled back is, the societal aspect or the social perception. So, for example, STOA's MBA, it is not a recognized degree. We don't even offer a diploma, which means, what do you tell your parents? Let's assume that your parents are paying for it. They are never going to agree to paying for a non-accredited. Then there is the whole marriage market. Like, for example, can you go today and say, I did my MD, but I did it from Stoa School, which is this online internet thing, and I did not actually, go and spend 2 years at a campus. Like, is that really acceptable to people? That is one. Second thing that is a challenge in some sense is people still look at some of these programs from a cost angle, right? Which is, hey, this is not an investment that we are making in ourselves, but this is like a top up over, like, I have already spent 4 years in an engineering college. I've spent 20 lakhs there. Do I really want to spend another 2 lakh, 2.5 lakhs, let's say, on Scalar or other signing up this ISA? Or what actually happens here is, even though we are creating much more value than, let's say, in most colleges are creating, we still are looked at as a cost side of things, because I've already spent 20 lakhs, and like here is additional top up of 2 lakh. And I think those mindsets will take some time to change, right? So for example, one of the things we get at Stoa is, hey, this is like a 6-month part-time internet thing. So why is it 2.5 lakh rupees, right? So that's a very cost-centric perspective in terms of almost calculating these guys are like daily wage earners and I need to pay them by the hour or something like that. It's not a value perspective. And in general, I think because people have been burned by the traditional education system, they are also skeptical in terms of, oh, like, will this program live up to my expectations? Second, am I competent enough to sort of go through the program? Let's say if I'm going through Stoa or if I'm going through Newton, am I going to stay motivated? Right. So there's a lot of self-doubt in that sense. So there are all these interesting aspects that are playing out right now, and I'm pretty sure we are all trying to figure out how to address those concerns. But primarily, it is the recognition and the degree diploma angle, which I think, and the regulations will probably liberal. I mean, they will go in that sense. They will be liberalized in that sense.
Right.
Is my sense, because if you look at the other OPMs, like let's look at Upgrad, look at Great Learning, they have taken a very different approach, which is also valid, which is we will tie up with existing institutions, and that is the way we will sort of issue a degree or diploma. If you look at Sunstone, for example, which is in the same MBA market, they have taken that approach, right? Like we will issue a postgraduate diploma by tying up with existing institutions. Whereas if you look at us, we have deliberately taken a different approach, saying we will build Stoa as a brand, and we want Stoa to become some sort of signal, and we are willing to work towards that for 10 years, 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, but I think I went on a rant there, but all these aspects, right, in terms of how society perceives these programs, how hiring partners perceive these programs. So, for example, we know that startups don't care whether it's Stoa or IM because they're going to hire the competent person for the job. Look at traditional corporate, I'm still sure that, like somebody who puts Stoa on their resume may not pass the HR whatever filter.
Screening.
Right? Screening, yeah, HR screening. Yeah, things as I said, right, this is still maybe a year 1, year 2 of all these cohort-based programs or online programs, and over time they will build recognition. Also depends on what talent comes in, and how we build our business models around building credibility with the hiring partners.
Right.
You good talent.
Yeah, this is very interesting, what you mentioned, Aditya, because we recorded an episode with somebody from Coursera. So he had a slightly nuanced take on this, right? So I was asking him the same thing about with the plethora of certificates that I see on LinkedIn these days. Does that credential really mean anything? Because everyone posts some certificate or the other on LinkedIn. So he said, yeah, it is the same challenge even for us. I mean, we've got some, we have the so-called institutions backing, or giving their stamp on the certificates, but eventually you have to show what you have done. And that's where the whole notion of the portfolio comes in, right? Yeah. And that's very interesting in what you are doing, because like you said, these designers have always had this notion of portfolio. You can create a portfolio of what you have done. You have something like a GitHub for the techies to actually show what they have done. But when you talk about business, unless you have actually tried your hand at setting up some whatever t-shirt printing business or something or the other in your college days, it's very difficult for these entrepreneurs to actually have something like a portfolio of what have they done and what have they learned. And I'm seeing this as a potential alternative to that, right? That I've done something. I mean, people these days even record podcasts as a way of articulating what they have learned. So what is your take on this for the entrepreneurs and business people, basically?
So, I mean, what you're saying, right? Actually, I think there is a better word than portfolio. It is proof of work.
Correct. Yeah.
My general sense is any way you choose to sort of show proof of work, most of the ways you show proof of work gets commoditized very fast. And you can't actually build a competitive advantage, right? Like now you have so many people doing podcasts, you have so many people building something using no-code tool to signal and so on and so forth. So just like a resume or whatever, all these things like let's say cold emailing, right? All of these things get commoditized very fast, but it is important, right? And that is where a sort of trend surfing could help, right? Like even though, I mean, I'm not sure if it is good when it comes to, let's say, careers, but at least when it comes to showing proof of work, what are the newer trends in terms of showing your competence? So one of the changes we made at Stoa's program very recently was, earlier we used to have these small breakout rooms within the live sessions where people would go and apply what they have learned, in a 10-minute, maybe 30-minute breakout room. And we realized that even though it was creating value for the individual learners, it was not creating proof of work, right? So we said, like, let's remove the breakout rooms from live sessions. Let live sessions be more about, learning the concept, maybe understanding what are the practical use cases, how somebody else has done it. And now we started doing case wickets, which is like a 24-hour competition of sorts within the cohort. You have a business problem, you work on it, you make the presentation. You make the presentation in whatever format. If you want to record a podcast, you do that. If you want to rap to a song, that's fine. If you want to prepare PPT, that's also fine, right? But create a proof of work, right? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that proof of work is important. The other thing, certificates, right? What you mentioned, going back to Coursera example, I think the traditional institutions have just deepened their brands by issuing certificates left, right, and center, right? Like if you go to LinkedIn, for example, you will have all these people claiming that, hey, I am like an IIM alumni, or I am like a BITS alumni. You go and double click on the profile, you realize like, it, I mean, it's a, I mean, being on campus, being like part of the, let's say, flagships is still very different. And that plays out internally within these communities as well, right? Like, so for example, if I'm part of BITS community and somebody approaches and says, hey, I'm BITS alumni and this and that, and I'm sensing most BITS alumni will go and check on LinkedIn what program they were part of. And if they're not part of the flagship undergrad program, the interaction is very different. It plays out very differently versus if somebody was an undergrad participant. I mean, people are generally helpful, no doubt about it. Right. I'm just saying that the perception of these cheapened certificates, right?
Correct.
And to me, it has also started. I mean, this is a very strictly personal opinion. To me, a lot of certificates now signal something negative about the person, right? Because if you're just collecting and collecting these whatever certificates from all over the place, Stanford, Harvard, I am this and that, I'm really like, I mean, I would rather see growth in this person's career and the responsibilities they're taking at an organization rather than like what certificates they have. Because I'm pretty sure we learn much more at our job than watching videos on the internet. So it's just a personal thing, right? Like now, when I few days back, I visited one profile and the education section was just not ending. It was there all these. I also think that in some sense, those act as counter signals if you're overdoing certifications.
Right. Yeah. And generally on that note, if you were to advise someone who's looking at adding something on the knowledge front via certifications or anything like that, what would be your Goldilocks ratio or approach that you would advise in terms of knowledge and application?
I would go for application, 100%. Like practically, I think, see, if it is just about knowledge, you don't even need Coursera, or you don't even need Stoa, you don't need anyone. You just need YouTube. If knowledge is something you are after, you should actively pursue opportunities where you can actually learn to apply. And this has played out in how we have also changed our curriculum over time, right? Like, so we are just 9 months since we launched the program, and we've undergone already, I guess, 3 iterations, right? And yeah, so I would do any certification, or I would do any cohort-based program or anything only for application, because knowledge is abundant. If you really care, it's there. Like, content is free, right? And I guess YouTube is the best university in that sense, because you can have the best of professors on YouTube, right? You don't even need to go and purchase, let's say, a $10 Udemy course or whatever, the annual subscription to Coursera. Knowledge is really free. You should actively find out opportunities where you can get to apply, right? So I mean, that's my summary, right? Like, I wouldn't pay for any certification or anything to pick up knowledge. The knowledge is really cheap.
And what would be your take on how people should think about application at different stages of their career? I'll give you the context from where this question popped in my mind. So we help companies develop this culture of innovation, entrepreneurship, right? So usually what we see is in these hackathons, it's the youngsters, the fresh grads who are like full enthu, and they're sitting through the weekend and coding something. The senior people, usually 30 35 plus, who have great experience, knowledge, they are like SMEs. In fact, they'll be in some companies, there are these consultants who are being approached by their clients to just come and give gyan, that's all, because they're that good, and they are not being leveraged internally in these hackathons. So in a lot of companies, what we've done is we've actually said these guys should be like these, almost like angel investors. The knowledge of these senior people with the legs of the younger folks, you can actually combine, and then you can create something, because these people will have the right kind of network. Any interesting idea, they'll say go talk to that person in the company, or I will introduce you to this client. And that's the value that these people don't have. So that's how we've said everyone can contribute in their own way to building that culture of innovation and entrepreneurship in the company. So now when you talk about people trying to do this, one of the ways in which people can help is go tell a startup that, see, I'm available, please come and use my experience, right? Because that's where then I can also apply what I'm talking about. We get some sense of apprehension from these people that, hey, I don't know where to go and actually offer my services. I don't know whether these startup entrepreneurs will be willing to take my advice. And you, as a third party, that these people have that knowledge. What is your take on that? I mean, do you see this happening more, and do you in your programs also see these entrepreneurs saying that this is the kind of knowledge that I wish I had, but you know I don't know to hire that person, I don't know to get them in as an advisor, but these are people there working in all these large MNCs who have great knowledge, expertise, but that's not being tapped.
Sure. So here are two angles to this, right? So one, let's look from this person who is working at the MNC, and then let us look at from the other angle where somebody needs the experience that these people have. Now, when it comes to these people who are working at MNC, right, and even if they want to advise, unless the problem challenges you or the space excites you, I don't think you're going to feel good about giving advice, because you're just let's say somebody working at Slack or Mindtickle and so on and so forth. I'm pretty sure any company building in B2B sales, Slack, something like that, those people are going to benefit hugely from just these people's knowledge about what competition does, what are the practical problems of a sales force, or how do US clients. So for example, if you're building out of India and you have never been to US, you don't know, right?
Correct.
How territory alignment happens and how salespeople work, what are the problems they face, what is the ramp up problems, and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty sure anybody within these B2B SaaS companies, or not even SaaS companies, right? Infosys, Wipro, TCS, whatever, they are going to have very specific domain knowledge that a lot of startups could benefit from. Now, how do we sort of, broker this
Right.
relationship?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
say. And towards that, what I found very interesting is the role that AngelList is playing.
Correct.
Right? And if you are investing on AngelList and you get access to this deal flow, maybe there are people like Vaibhav Kundwar, if you look at Kushal, Kushal of First Check, and all these syndicates, right? They have some of the best deal flows, and a lot of young entrepreneurs who are working through, who are raising from Better and First Check and 100 VC and so on and so forth. That's a great place for people to not only discover where they can help, but actually take a bet. If you feel the problem is valid, if you're part of the syndicate, I'm pretty sure that whoever is leading the syndicate is going to be more than happy to make the connection.
Right.
Right. And in that context, I think AngelList is a great place to be that broker between entrepreneurs and people with experience. And not only you are giving advice, but you are literally putting skin in the game, maybe whatever, 2-3 lakhs or 5 lakhs of that particular company. Now, where I see things not working out, and I've seen this, is people approach entrepreneurs and then say, hey, I'm good at tech, I know this industry, this, that, and I want like advisory equity.
Hmm.
That just breaks, like even before the relationship is formed, it just
Right.
breaks, because increasingly what I'm seeing from people who are in traditional industries is the expectation is advisory equity. And that actually creates significant problems for the entrepreneurs when they're trying to raise a round. Why have you given this person 2%, 3%? And then everybody who comes after has that expectation.
Hmm.
कि,
Hmm.
"मुझे भी चाहिए equity,"
Right.
right? And then
Hmm.
it becomes a very complicated relationship.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
would, and that is where I would say that Angel is put your skin in the game, right? You have much better chance of making a significant amount of money by being a advisor and shareholder rather than
Hmm.
just seek. And I don't think that should be the primary motive also, right? Like
Right.
I'm pretty sure some of these senior folks can build significant software businesses themselves, maybe in
Hmm.
few years down the line when they're
Hmm.
ready, and so on and so forth. So I would ideally try to maximize my luck surface area in
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
aspect, like just talking to more entrepreneurs, trying to be helpful, and so on and so forth. Now let's look from the other side, which is entrepreneurs, right? A lot of times entrepreneurs feel that, oh, these big competitors, like for example, I'm building something in sales. Why would somebody at Mindtickle help me, right? Like, wouldn't that be a competition and
Hmm.
so on and so forth? But what I've literally found is there are all these small, small pockets of opportunities which these new firms don't want to pursue or go after.
Hmm.
And if you're building in that space, these people are more than happy, because it not only helps them understand what are the pain points they're not addressing, but at some point of time, a potential strategic partnership could evolve, right? Like, so, yeah, in general, I think entrepreneurs anyway reach out, right? Like, because they have their lives
Yeah.
on, but from the other side, this is how I would approach.
Right. Yeah. But I think that there has to be that systematic space for creating that exchange, right?
Yeah.
Which I think AngelList is great at doing. We've in fact, at one company we created an internal AngelList kind of a thing where we said
Right.
everyone won't be able to do this innovation work, but you can offer advice. So we in fact created an internal Kickstarter kind of a thing where instead of money you actually volunteer time, that I have whatever 3 hours of marketing effort, I can do good storytelling for whatever hackathon idea that you have and things like that. So AngelList I think is a great platform. Next time anyone who comes to me with that question, I'm definitely you know advising them to go and join some of these syndicates. That's so. Coming back to Stoa, Aditya, what is your take on the whole peer learning and community based learning aspect of what you're doing?
Yeah. So the first thing, right, like all this cohort based, peer learning based, or community based, it's really not new, right? Like learning even in what happens in college today is largely peer led, right? Like BITS or IIT, I'm assuming, has like few great professors and a lot of long tail of average or not so good professors. And you learn more in your hostels rather than your classrooms in most cases, right? So it's not a new concept. Now what is new here is not being in the same physical space and not having that extended period of 4 years or 2 years of have fights and, yeah, I mean, the whole
The whole absorption and
relationship.
soaking of the whole
Yeah,
experience,
yeah.
right?
And that could be both beneficial. I mean there are pros and cons of both, right? Which really means that you're at best behavior in online communities, especially if it is like, you're not going to fight off some ego battle. Even though, I mean, I'm guessing as you scale, you will see those as well in these
Hmm.
communities where, some couple of people maybe started dating and things went wrong, right? There is real possibility of that.
Correct. Hmm.
And I think the younger folks are really good at building relationships in the virtual world. In fact, they may not be so good, I'm guessing, at building relationships in the offline world. Especially like whoever has gone through their first and second year of college through these last 2 years. I'm like really curious how they are going to adjust back to the real world, right? Because they would have gotten used to seeing their classmates on a Zoom and maybe chatting, I don't know, on Instagram or WhatsApp or whatever. And in general, I think as people are coming through this digital space, right, where kids are now have their iPhones and so on and so forth, much earlier than, like, I remember when I went to college in 2005, I only got my desktop in my second semester,
Hmm.
right? And I'm guessing that whatever 18-year getting a desktop has now come back to maybe, like a fourth year, I mean, plus four or plus five kid having a
Yeah.
computer and
Correct.
access to internet. So these people are inherently internet native.
Hmm.
Okay. In that context, what happens online is very interesting, right? Because if you go to the larger internet, you can of course go to Reddit, but it is largely pseudo-anonymous, and there is real possibility that some abuse might happen and so on and so forth. Whereas these niche communities that are forming now, right, like cohort-based programs, what they really do a good job of is bringing together people with similar interests and actually providing structure to interactions, right? If you, I mean, you can go to Omegle also and just talk to random strangers on the internet. But what these programs really do is they bring together, and that is why a lot of effort goes in curation of communities and making sure that you're getting the right people in. And that is something special about this new model of education, because
Right.
I think even Coursera or the earlier versions of online education did not really care as much about who is coming together and how can they build relationships and how can they benefit from each other. Whereas this whole new wave, if you look at Maven, if you look at On Deck, if you look at us, if you look at 10K designers, what we are really doing is we are curating the right set of people to come together and go through a journey of maybe 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, like so timeline varies,
Right.
and then really compress what would come out of 4 years into that whatever six months or 3 months, and provide structures for those relationships to get built. Because if you look at Stoa, I think our program is 6 months. By the end of second or third month, people have already found friends. They are already hanging out with those friends outside of what we are doing, right? And we don't even have visibility at times in terms of all this underground community building that is happening, which is not being done by us. Of course, initially we have to sort of take a lot of load in terms of arranging events and so on and so forth, and then it just flows, right? Yeah, I mean, just to summarize my point, right? Like, this is not something new. What is new here is just that this is happening in a metaverse or in the internet and in the cloud rather than in person, right?
Right.
And that has its own pros and cons.
So, two parts to my question. Okay, let me ask it as separate questions only. So, first is how should people, probably of your generation, my generation, who, like you said, didn't start off their careers in a digital native, internet native world, but are sort of tuned into all these kind of things. They know what they're what are the latest things that are happening. As a member of this community, what would your advice be to people who are joining these kind of communities, of how should they maximize this, because they're slightly at an disadvantage as compared to somebody who's probably 22, 23,
Yeah.
for whom this is a natural way of life, whereas somebody who's maybe 30, 35 plus, how do you what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to a lot of self-coaching and before you join these communities, right? So I'll give you two specific examples from Stoa. We use Discord for our
Right.
whatever community server,
Hmm.
and it's just overwhelming. Anybody on the other side of 30, even when we started doing Discord, for me it was like, what is this dark mode, and why are there so many channels, and what is this spamming
Correct.
going on, and so on and so forth, right? So a lot of cognitive overload. The way to sort of manage that is twofold. One, sort of hold back judgment, which means don't make quick assessments of what is going on, what people are doing, and what people are saying. Just hold on, get and second, manage your cognitive overload in terms of if there are, let's say, 50 channels, just figure out what interests you, and if you're just spending time on those 2 3 channels, for example, is good enough. Other aspect of it is uh, self-coaching, that I have something to learn from these people, right? So, for example, I personally feel that over the last 12 months, as I worked with Raj, Sharma, and Sheldon, all these people are about 25 and 33. I would have never imagined myself, like, I see significant self-growth in terms of understanding this customer base or consumer base, what is happening in these people's lives, what are their perception of the world, how do they think of, let's say, opportunities, and so on and so forth. So, for example, I was never comfortable with, let's say, no-code tools. I haven't even heard of that. Because of I started working with these folks that I even came to know. And now I can't imagine, let's say, hiring an agency to do my website ever, right? Because I personally feel I can just go and build it in whatever Bubble or Webflow or Like so yeah, just being open-minded, understanding that you are going to face cognitive overload and being ready for that cognitive overload. Even the way people converse, right? Like, so for example, I'm not sure how many of us are okay, especially if we have become parents, like, in the community and people using their words right, left, and center, the whole conversation being something like GIFs and memes and so on and so forth. It takes a while to be used to, but I think if you're open minded, you sort of understand, right? Like finally, these people, even in their early 20s, pretty interesting, right? Like, and they're not as shallow as some of the, like, it's case with every generation, right? Like everybody in
Right.
40s thinks that ये आजकल के बच्चे right? So if you hold that back, I think you normally have a good time. And there have been some, I would tell you something, right? In Stoa, through our cohorts, the funniest people in all our cohorts are actually probably the oldest guys in the cohort, right? So I remember from our cohort when Neeraj has about 13, 14 years of experience at John Deere. He was amazingly funny. And in our current cohort, we have Anand from Capgemini, and he's, and in fact, this case weekend, he was probably the funniest guy because they did a role play which none of the other guys did. Like the younger folks were still doing PPT and, like, and this and that, and Anand, Anurag, and some of these folks who are senior in the community, they went for a totally YOLO approach, and they said, like, we are going to be in the boardroom and play the roles of board members, and they projected whatever the scenario we were talking about much better, just in terms of presentation format, right? It was interesting to see that. I mean, yeah, it was interesting to see that these people these people are funny, right? Like these are not like serious corporate whatever folks who have lost humor, and
Right.
they're still funny, and it's interesting.
Yeah. That's, I think the part you mentioned about cognitive overload is highly underrated. People don't understand the damage it can do, and how important is it to take control of that, or rather at least have some kind of rationalization of that cognitive overload, right? I think that's a very important point that you brought out there. So the second question that I had was, as a community manager, right, what are your insights around how to create and make this community thrive and flourish? The reason why I ask that is not just from the point of view of someone who's actually running something like a Stoa school, but these days if you think about it, whether it's your personal brand or whether you are in a large corporate where you are responsible for creating a group, the whole notion of community building has become extremely important. Whatever whatever cause that you're talking about, there has to be some sense of community building, because that's when people will go that extra mile to do something. Otherwise it's going to be just a tick mark for most people. So having that belief in that community, what lessons can listeners draw from what you have been doing in whatever they are doing, whether it's it's about running their company, or about themselves, or an NGO that they believe in? That's the reason for this question.
Sure. So, firstly, let me just say that my team is far better at this than, like, I don't take much credit for the way Stoa community has shaped up. It's like largely people like Shelton, Nikaya, Niraj, who have driven thought leadership when it comes to building community. But from what I see, there are a few things that really are important to understand about community building, whether for a course or within organization, right? There is this book by David Spinks, and the title is very interesting. Community, you're essentially in the business of belonging and creating that sense of belonging amongst all the community members. Now, if you look at community from that angle, that I want to create a feeling or create sort of sense that I belong to this place, what are the things you would ideally aim for? You would aim for people being vulnerable, being able to express whatever they want to say or discuss, and so on and so forth. That is one angle. The other angle is I want to find at least few people like myself in the community who are maybe thinking the same way, have the same interests, and so on and so forth. And lastly, not breaking down community, and that is equally important. Yeah, I mean, we mostly approach this from like a positive angle in terms of, oh, let's get people to belong. But you also need to be actively thinking, what is it? that will break down this sense of belonging. The times that we live in, for example, the political opinions are like, highly sort of polarized in that. There are really no centrists in that sense. Which means if you're a community manager, you really need to be thinking about what are the guardrails or what are the things that are acceptable to discuss within this community, what are the things that are not acceptable, and saying that upfront. Right. So, for example, one of the things we have avoided at Stoa is just getting into political arguments. And people may say, oh, freedom of expression, this and that. But within the boundaries of this community, we have deliberately saying, because we know that this will lead to breakdown of the community, that this is not acceptable. Right. So setting rules upfront in terms of what is acceptable behavior, what is not acceptable behavior, and not just laying down it as a rule, but explaining the reasoning, right, behind why you are making this rule. So rules is important. Second, rituals are important. What are the common touch points where everybody sort of gathers together? Because there might be some browning motion and some chaos and some self-organized chaos within every community, right? Because that is the best way communities form. If you force a lot of structure, then community actually doesn't form. You need to have common touch points or rituals where everybody comes together and then is free to go and explore and then come back for another ritual, right? In our case, it is the Thursday night events that happen every alternate week. Just speed meetings, like, or a quiz night or game night. And it is just fun, and people are not expected to prepare and come and just hang around, go in small breakout rooms, maybe compete as a team, and so on and so forth. That Thursday night is something like a ritual for us. And the great actually inspiration you can take is from the religious or quasi-religious organizations, right? Like if you look at church, that Sunday morning mass is such a pivotal, I mean, it's almost like a central piece of that whole community. If you look at art of living, that short kriya or maybe coming together for long kriya, that's such a fundamental, part of that thing. Or if you look at Vipassana, for example, just that shared experience of, I mean, I might have done Vipassana in Igatpuri and somebody might have done it in America, but we have that shared experience ki, both of us went through that 10 days of silence. And these memories of shared pain are equally important when it comes to building community, right? Like there has to be that element of something being hard, something being difficult, something being painful, and going through that shared experience actually tightens the community bond much better. If you look at, for example, now I'm just thinking, if you look at US Navy SEALs, there are these videos on YouTube about how they go through 7 days and they're made to stand in some dal dal for 24 hours and all of that. It might seem like this is extreme, but the purpose of that community or is something entirely different, and in that context it makes sense for them to put to that pain. Right. For us, it was very interesting because this was the first case weekend, the weekend that just went by. People were up until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and then came back for presentations at 10, right? And I'm pretty sure whoever went through that community experience and stayed up and worked through with their team and so on and so forth, they're going to remember these 5 people for long, right? Like, and it has nothing to do with what we do essentially, what Stoa does, but it has everything to do with how that team decided to work together and sort of push through those 24 hours. Right. Yeah, I mean, I went on a rant there, but so community is as much about, like, just to summarize, it is as much as about what you choose to do, what you choose not to do, and how do you create this sense of belonging. It is also about drama. So communities which are very plain, linear, oh, let's come together every Saturday and have some fantastic conversation, they will disintegrate at some point. There needs to be some drama, right? There needs to be some conflict. There needs to be some shared experiences that sort of make sure that the community experience is not linear, but is sort of, more rhythmic in that sense. And every community will go through a patch where engagement seems to be dropping off. And community manager will be like, oh, am I doing something wrong? And like, what can I do to make it right? At Stoa, we have understood that there are cycles. So there will be patches where community won't engage. And if you actually force to, if you try to drive engagement, it actually backfires because people are not in that mind space something might be happening at work. Maybe it is the month end, which means everybody is like, some targets, or I don't know what is happening, right? Or for example, Diwali or Christmas, or so something might be happening with everyone's life, and sometimes it's okay to be let it be and not trying to overdo things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You must have found me smiling at multiple places, because there were so many things that you mentioned which resonated, and a lot of what we talk about as well. When we talk to in our actually in our pitch to some of these owners and founders and people who are trying to build a culture in the company, we actually tell them that, see, this is a solved problem. Look at mass religion, look at politicians who have always managed to influence people without actually being in the same room, right? So the importance of these rituals. And another thing that we've been doing for the last 2.5 years is something called as CTQ compounds, where we actually help people build habits of reading. So people sign up for a 6-month program, and we've done 20 cohorts already. And people, it's a shared experience for them. They read together. There's a common article that is shared with them. They read, they engage with it. There are, like you said, there are, rules set well in advance in terms of what is allowed, what is not allowed. And then there is a seat compounds forever group where, members of all different cohorts, our future stack, daily reader, they all can interact. Sundays, we do something, where we share some bonus reads, what people have written, and all of that. So I could see all that you have talked about, especially the fact about not trying to over engineer engagement as well. Extremely important. So yeah, thanks. That was that was really a validation of all that we've been seeing and doing ourselves. So a follow-up question, on what you've been doing, right? So is this a culmination, or if not a culmination, a manifestation of what you have done in your previous companies that has helped you put together Stoa School?
Yes, not just me, right? Like I would say it is sum total of all like first 10 people at Stoa in terms of what was our primary interest and what we were trying to do, and so on and so forth. So, for example, Raj and Sharmad, who were another co-founders at Stoa, they were building Nova Semita, which was a ISA-based coding bootcamp, and they have been building communities on Flickr, I don't know what not, since they were in class 10th. They ran the Astronomy Society of Goa, they were into astrophysics, astrophotography, and they have always been community builders right from when they were in school. Yeah. I was always fascinated by bringing people together, and I think everybody, first 10 people at Straw, all were educators before they sort of decided to be on the business side of things, right? And the thing about education is, it is, people keep talking about impact, and so on. There is no better place than education to actually see impact, right? Because I
Right.
mean, everybody creates impact, like even in a, let's say, software or like a big organization. It's just that a lot of times the impact is not visible. To us, we were always, all of us were driven by seeing the impact. Even before Stoa, we launched Stoa, we went through a 6-9 month experimentation. I was trying to create a community of teenagers and like, around emotional intelligence, emotional well-being, and so on and so forth. Rajan Sharma were doing Nova Semita. Shelton, who is now leads our community, was at Nova Semita building Nova Semita's community. Then when we started working together, we first tried to reach out to YouTubers and like, folks who had any audience, to reach out to them and saying, hey, we understand what learning communities are, and we understand the dynamics of learning communities, and we will help you create community. That experiment sort of did not work out because, it was not primarily the other person's motivation to build a learning community, and we were frustrated because we were working on their timelines and so on and so forth. So all of that sort of, sum total of, for example, Raj earlier had set up a offline alternate learning center in Goa where kids used to come and hang, right, like college, 8, 9 student kids, and then parents would force OJE and this and that. Why are you doing this alternate stuff? And the kids would drop out, right? So we were primarily in K-12 space, and what we realized there is, even the kids were having fantastic time with us. The decision makers were other people, like teachers and parents and so on and so forth. And then when we went through this 6 months of experimentation, offering other people to build their learning community, what we realized is any community that has a specific outcome defined has much better chance of success. Right? Like if it is about career transitions, people are already serious. If it is about building their own business, people are already serious. And people have agency. And that is how we moved into the adult learning space,
Hmm.
where we said like here people have agency, they have strong motivations to do something that they like, decide to pursue. And then what was interesting to us was I had an MBA, Raj did not have MBA. And that conversation was like, hey, like what would, if I were to design a program for Raj,
Hmm.
what would that program look like? And that is how the whole curriculum sort of shaped up. And, then last 9 months, everybody, largely we have built in public. So most people know what happened in the last 9 months.
Right, right. And how has that experience been, especially since it was in the middle of the pandemic? How did that have any impact or role in how things have shaped up?
No, totally. I mean, one part is business education. And when I said earlier also, right, better decision making where personal and professional life. What pandemic really did was it forced people to build new relationships, which was a blessing for us because we came at the right time, right? Like if our launch had happened, let's say in 2019, I'm not really sure, right? And we are very honest with this, right? I mean, even the pandemic has impacted our lives negatively for most of us. As a business, at least it worked for us because people were anyway stuck in home and they were looking for building new relationships and so on. So the first 25 people who joined Stoa's community were all rebels in that sense, and they were sort of restless sitting at home and so on and so forth. I guess a lot of us also struggled through personal crisis, not just on the health front, but maybe breakups and just feeling confused and so all of that sort of added to what happened at Stoa. Now, as let's say the first wave sort of went away, then the question for us also as a business was, hey, is this really sustainable? What will happen when the people get out of home? Will they have time to spend on learning? Will they continue to spend time on learning? So we made certain changes to the program to sort of address that gap. But largely now we have built a very strong conviction that if people are able to meet newer people and they're able to learn new things and they're able to sort of accelerate their journey through these 24 weeks
Hmm.
towards whatever they want to achieve, this Stoa is here to stay, right? And in that sense, a lot of times if you go to all these investment meetings and so on and so forth, the question is, oh, how will you win the market and so on. And I generally think that education is not a winner takes it all market in that sense, right? Like always find very interesting niche people, let me put it, underappreciated talent, which is much more ambitious, which is looking for something better.
Hmm.
As long as Stoa becomes that honest broker, right? Like, so I actually picked up this term. I think Paul Graham tweeted one of the substacks written by some piano trainer or something like that. And I think the role that we are really playing here is being that honest broker, right? And not just bringing like hiring partners and let's say investors together with entrepreneurs and people looking for better jobs, but we are actually giving them a sort of commandment or values that will stay for them to succeed as entrepreneur or as early stage or startup folks. For example, one of the things we keep often repeating is like life in general and business in general is positive sum game, and it is so rare because in our education system we have always been told that like education is a zero sum game, right? Like if you don't like only 1500 people can go to IMABC and everyone else is like not good.
Hmm.
So from that mindset to saying that even I mean you might be competing with someone which is fair game, but you should pray for their success as well. It's so for example, even in our community we have people who are building educational businesses and they are learning of our cohort based model, which is totally fine, right? Like so,
Right.
and we actually said no to someone in cohort one because we felt array this person will like copy what we are doing. And then we really sat down and said, "Ki, array, do we really care? Like if this person succeeds, we can still claim that success for ourselves because this person was a Stoa fellow. So how does it matter if they copy?" And since then, like our approach changed. We said, okay, if you want to learn, come here, feel free to copy what we are doing, right? And it also sort of makes your business inherently better. Like we have come around, or at least I personally have come around to that viewpoint that instead of just holding back and saying, oh, this is my secret sauce, whatever, right? Like, even, I mean, you will see this over next 2 3 months. We're probably going to just put out, right? Like, here is our curriculum. Here is the way we sort of do things. Here is how we are looking at growing our business. Just going to put out there because ultimately it comes down to execution. And there are just so many moving parts to delivering a great educational experience, right? It's all in that sense. Like if you look at Elon Musk, right? He wrote down like his whatever 10-year path to building a EV company. Anybody could have copied that, right? Like Volkswagen could have copied that, and GM could have copied that. But the thing is, unless you are passionate about solving that problem, right? Like you can start with a lot of enthu, right? Like anybody can start a Stoa like program with a lot of enthu. But until you are inherently passionate about this community building, you are passionate about, we genuinely believe, right? Like, so for example, we often hear about American dream and like, bootstrapping your way to success and hard work always pays off and so on and so forth. What is Indian dream? And I think that's a very interesting question for a institution like Stoa to answer. What is Indian dream today? Is it to build your own business? Is it to build services business? Is it to build for the world, build in India? Not just from an entrepreneur's point of view, but also people who don't want to be entrepreneurs but are looking for exciting challenges. And once you sort of look from that meta angle, right, and you keep going back to sort of that thought process, I think what happens on a tactical day-to-day basis also becomes much easier. Like the decision making becomes much easier because you are going after something so big that what really matters is whether you are customer obsessed and customer centric rather than what everyone else is doing and whether who is raising how much, and things sort of start to, I mean, you start to see through things and really try to find what is at the core of your business. And what is interesting about Stoa is we are in the business, we're teaching about business, and almost everything that we sort of talk about on a daily basis, we are forced to reflect back on that, right? So yesterday I wrote a prompt on emotional intelligence as a leader. I wrote that prompt, and as I was writing it and I was reviewing it and editing it, I was already self-reflecting. And then I think one of our team members posted it on our company WhatsApp group and said, hey, this is such a nice prompt. And to me, it was like, is this like, is this a comment on, which is fair, right? Like, because you also lose your shit sometimes in the moment. You also react impulsively and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we are teaching people about, or if not us, whoever is coming as a faculty is teaching people about emotional intelligence and how to stay calm in situations of conflict and crisis. That is something very interesting about these last 9 months, right? Like you're not only teaching and talking about something, but you're simultaneously practicing it. I hope more business schools or more people who are, let's say, I mean, I would any day learn about coding from, let's say, AWS team or somebody who's building crazy products. I would learn from them because as I learn, let's say, 6 months with them, they are also learning something about building products and so on and so forth. And if they are vulnerable enough to share that with me, I mean, my affiliation or my affinity towards coding will be much stronger because I can see the purpose, I can see how someone else is doing it. So in that context, last 9 months have been very interesting.
Right. So, if you think about where Stoa is today and what are the potential futures, and I'm a big fan of not thinking of one future because there'll never be, forecasting is not the thing. You need to think of futures rather than one future, right? So, is there a future where you're going to stand for the whole alternative bit for education, not just MBA, but from homeschooling to no schooling? And do you see yourself as, say, the equivalent of a Peter Thiel in US, who gave this fellowship for anyone who's going to drop out and all of that?
I mean, we still haven't seen any success anywhere close to what Peter Thiel has seen, right? So, but in terms of the future, right, especially when it comes to education, we are very opinionated, both Raj and me. I mean, I also mentioned that, we went through all that alternative schooling, this and that. And in general, our sense is how can we, I mean, if you have to imagine the future of education, The fundamental problem is it has been an overly regulated space.
Correct.
Right. So for example, if I have to start a B school and start offering degrees, I need somebody with PhD. And the question to ask is why? Or if you look at schooling, it's like, oh, you need B.Ed and whatever, whatnot, right? Or M.Ed. Or why? And how can we get the best of people to teach, but not limit their financial outcomes to teaching? Like, how do you? I think that has been the fundamental problem with education. That the best people who could be teaching don't want to teach because it doesn't pay well. I think if we fundamentally solve that problem, and we might solve it in very narrow sense of, let's say, business education, but in general, this homeschooling, no schooling, micro schooling, there are all these, variants. When you look at K-12, what could be really interesting is just breaking down the boundaries between academia and career, right? Whether it is K-12, whether it is college, whether it is adult learning or upskilling, how can you really make people like that open door kind of thing, right? Like where people come, maybe teach kids for 2 months or 1 month and then go back, right? Like that is like this is how you do your sabbatical. You come from, let's say, a big industry, like big company like, let's say, Microsoft or Infosys and TCS. You go back to the classroom, you share what you have to share with the kids, and then you go back, right? And there are these community managers who essentially then take care of making sure that there is consistency of experience and so on and so forth. So in that sense, these community builders then become the central piece. So you are essentially separating out the responsibility of teaching from actually making sure that somebody has a great educational experience. Just splitting that responsibility, right? Like I'm not sure if it happens today, but when I was in school, my primary school, we just had one teacher for everything.
Right.
And they may not have subject expertise to teach everything, but they were able to build amazing consistency, build relationship with every student in their class because it was just one teacher, right? And inherently, that model doesn't work because then you are essentially compromising on the subject knowledge. And then you have other model in high school, which we had was there was a different teacher for each subject. There was still a class teacher, but class teacher was also subject teacher. Versus, let's say, a community manager with all these teachers who are teaching. So and who teaches and how, like what is their motivation for teaching, and are they bringing practical life experience to teaching, and then are we really learning what matters, right? Like, so a lot of my MBA curriculum, I now in hindsight feel it was useless. Are the curriculums responsive to what is happening in the world? Are they relevant, right? You would often see all these tweets, oh, we should be teaching financial literacy to teachers, children, no, we should
Right.
be teaching entrepreneurship to, but kya padhaoge na? So ultimately the community manager or somebody needs to be responsible for understanding what is relevant, what needs to be taught, what is not needed from what was being taught, curriculums being responsive, who is teaching that being responsive, and so on and so forth. And this is already happening maybe outside of school right now, right? Like whereas out school, I think it's a very interesting model where you work with the teacher for 5 6 sessions and they can teach anything, right? Like they can teach the most random stuff which is interesting to children. And but yeah, I mean, that's the future of education in that my sense, right? Like where curriculums are responsive, who teaches is very fluid in that sense, like people have an open door with the industry.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are still a lot more topics, to talk about, but I think, we'll conclude this. Probably is going to be part one of our many conversations, Aditya. So I'm going to conclude this, and in the end, we usually have this short section where we ask for the guests hot takes on the future relevance of some things. So you've covered a lot of things, but what do you think is the future relevance of online cohort based learning courses in India?
Sure. I think they will become institutions in themselves, right? Like these will become household brand names. They will have value in the marriage market, right? Like, so if come from Stoa, I mean, there is no reason why stoashadi.com can't exist, or 10K designer shadi.com can't exist, or newtonshadi.com. I'm guessing that will be when these brands become household names, right? Like then this sector as a whole would have truly arrived.
Right. Okay. What is the future relevance of B schools in India? The traditional B schools in India.
I think the top 15, 20, 25 B schools will continue to thrive and will continue to attract the best talent. but the long tail of crappy B schools, they will go out of business. They will be essentially eaten by all this online education.
Right. And final one, what is the future relevance of product startup companies in India?
No, I mean, ultimately,
Tech product startup companies. Yeah, that's what I meant.
For example, if you look at SaaS, I think the next 10 years is going to be an amazing ride for Indian SaaS companies. In fact, if there was a ETF or an index fund which just like, takes a bet on Indian SaaS companies, I would happily invest and buy as much as whatever liquidity I have, right? Like I have very strong feeling that this sector will take off. Now, where my where I think things could be better is just the talent, right? Like look at productivity and so on and so forth. Like we still have very bloated organizations when it comes to product, and like what a Instagram, if you see 10% team could do, I'm guessing probably in India we'll still need like 100% team to pull it off. In terms of productivity, in terms of our product thinking, in terms of just having that product culture, we have a long way to go. But irrespective of that, I think our tech product companies will sort of go a long way.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aditya. This is a fantastic, I think, 1 hour long conversation. Had to put an end to this, but I think we can go on. There are a lot of topics that I can pick your brains on and have an engaging conversation. Thanks a lot for this, Aditya.
Thank you for having me, Harish. It was wonderful, just putting, some structure to everything that keeps hanging in the brain, so to say. But good chat, good chat.